Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome. It's a 4-day seminar on the topic Humanity at the Crossroad. And I would like to introduce you to Professor Krishna, or introduce Professor Krishna to you, Father. He has been coming to the Ojai Retreat for several years since the beginning. And he's a retired professor of physics, and he has been a principal of a Krishnamurti school in India. And for the last 5 or 10 years, he's giving seminars in different parts of the country, our country and the world, actually. And it's always a great privilege to have him here. Thank you.
Yeah. Good evening, friends. It's always a pleasure to come back to Ojai, especially this very beautiful retreat here. I'm afraid this whole seminar is going to be around rather serious questions which are facing humanity globally. And there may not be very simple answers to the problems that we are facing. So it may all sound a bit pessimistic, but I'm not trying to be either pessimistic or optimistic. I'm just trying to be very factual, looking at our life and the issues that we are facing globally throughout the world, especially the more serious issues. And then we can discuss the possible solutions, whether the solutions require changes outwardly in social structures, political structures, and so on, or they need a change within ourselves, which would then reflect also in society. And if so, what is it that we can do to bring about that change? That's going to be the basic theme of all these 4 days. First of all, I think we must acknowledge that there is great ingenuity and capacity in the human mind to solve problems and bring about solutions. If we look at the problems human society was facing 100 years ago, when our forefathers were living, and what the situation is now, you can see the incredible amount of progress that we have achieved in various fields through the acquisition of knowledge, expertise, skills, and so on, all of which are attributable to the system of education that we have instituted. So we are not denigrating what has already been achieved. We know that many problems which were there 100 years ago are either solved, or at least we know how to solve them, so that even if there are parts of the world where they are not solved, it's a matter of only addressing them and applying the same methods to solve them. Problems like those of epidemics, which killed millions of people in olden days, of famines, of natural disasters of various kinds, with the result that longevity has increased by at least a factor of 2 over the last 100 years. We have also solved problems in agriculture, in communication, in transportation. One can now reach any part of the globe within 24 hours. And one can connect with a person across the globe instantly through the internet. So they are talking about the whole world being one global village. Whereas earlier, every village was isolated from the rest of the world because they could not have communication, they could not have fast transportation. We also made great forays into space and produced satellites which have helped in communication becoming global. All that has changed our life outwardly enormously. We live very differently now, and the external circumstances in which we live have changed drastically. The healthcare system that we have instituted is all very remarkable. The achievements are remarkable. So they point to a certain potential, a certain capacity, a certain intelligence which is there in the human mind. Having acknowledged that, it is important for us to look at the problems that we are facing now, some of which may be not very different from the problems our ancestors were facing, but a lot of which are completely new and therefore require a completely different approach from the one that has been used to solve the problems of the past. If I look at society globally, and talk about the more serious problems facing us as a whole rather than in each individual country, I would say that perhaps the greatest problem we are facing is the problem of groupism. That every human being belongs to a group, either a national group, a religious group, a political group, a linguistic group, or a caste, and so on. Identifies himself with that group, feels strongly for the welfare of that group and works hard, but looks upon other groups with suspicion treats them as rivals and is willing to exploit them for the benefit of his own group. Whether that exploitation be military exploitation or, in more modern times, economic exploitation. Basically aimed at furthering the interest of the me and the mine. And this underlies a lot of manifestations of violence and insecurity which we see throughout the world today. The problems of terrorism, of religious riots, of divisions between various communities and nations, and eventually, of course, war. All that is a consequence of these divisions. And our response has been to create a United Nations where representatives of the different governments would sit together and discuss any dangerous developments and try to diffuse them. This has been going on since the Second World War, but the situation seems to come to a boil every now and again in one part of the world or another, and the United Nations has to activate itself and see how to make compromises, somehow diffuse the situation, and so on. Not that that is not necessary, but it is like a human being who's getting headache every day, and every day he takes aspirin to solve that headache, but never inquires why he is getting headaches every day. What is the underlying cause? What is the underlying disease that is causing this? Because so long as that underlying cause is not eliminated, he's going to have these headaches and going to depend on aspirin. Is the United Nations like an aspirin to solve the headache of war every time it develops either in Kashmir or in Palestine or Afghanistan or Iraq? And if it is within a nation, between two communities, we have the police force, we have courts, we have the justice system, all of which is trying to control the crime, control the violence in the country. But the control never solves the problem because it does not eliminate the cause of the problem. And the underlying cause of all this division is in the human mind. Those boundaries between America and other countries of the world and so on are not just out there on the surface of the earth. They are in our human mind. If I were to do a thought experiment and consider myself to be an alien who came from another planet and was approaching the earth and looking down at it with a telescope, when I am at a great distance, I would see a beautiful blue spherical globe, the picture of which we have seen taken from satellites and space missions. But as he draws nearer, he will see forests and mountains and rivers and beautiful landscapes, sometimes awe-inspiring. And as he draws still nearer, he will see some 30 or 40 places on the earth where one set of human beings are arraigned against another set of human beings with guns and armaments ready to shoot each other. Surely he would wonder what the matter is. Why are these people killing each other or ready to kill each other? They are at the pinnacle of evolution. Neither the animals nor the plants have brought the earth to such a pass. They consider themselves extremely intelligent species. They treat themselves as masters of the planet. And yet, they have destroyed their own species like no other life form on earth. And he would really wonder whether we are intelligent and why this is happening. He would see that there are people who are free to travel within a certain region, but as soon as they reach a certain boundary, they turn back. They are not able to go through, though birds go through, the animals go through, the wind goes through, the mountains go through, the forests go through. But somewhere these people have divided up this planet, and their philosophy, their state of mind changes as soon as they are at the border. They are not willing to solve the problems within their own country through violence. They have set up courts to prevent that. But across the boundary, they don't accept that. They feel that there they need to have an army. They need to solve the problem through force, through war. And he would wonder why that is. That is the state of humanity. We have so got used to it because each one of us grow up with that group. We grow up in a particular nation. We read about this every day in the newspapers. It has become commonplace, so the mind gets used to it, almost accepts it as inevitable. I don't protest when I have to go to Delhi and queue up in a line to get permission to come to this country. Or to go to Pakistan is even more difficult. Not difficult for a crow or a dog to go through, but for me it's almost impossible. Or to China. That is the state of humanity globally. And we may feel that right now there is no war. But is that true? When do we call it a war? When guns start shooting, when planes drop bombs, then we call it a war. But that's just a big physical manifestation. Much before that happens, there is psychological warfare between the two groups or communities which is going on. And ultimately, when it reaches a certain boiling point, it results in what we call war. So when do you exactly draw the boundary? Where do you say, now it is peace and now it is war? Is it peace when no bombs are falling and no guns are shooting? Or is that just a convenient definition we have given to peace and war? Isn't it a continuum? Krishnamurti said, the world problem is not different from the individual problem. If I am divided from my fellow man, whether it's my wife or my neighbor, that same psychology works between nations and creates division between nations. So the global problem is not different from the individual problem. And that's why the question arises whether it is sufficient just to have systems of control, because you are just controlling the symptoms, but we are not curing the disease underlying those symptoms. And so this is eternal. One sees that. One sees that our whole history is a history of wars. For 5,000 years we have been at war, perhaps longer, but it is not recorded. And in this century itself we have had 2 great world wars. And we are hurtling towards a third one and hoping somehow to prevent it from happening. That's the state, dangerous state in which humanity actually finds itself. So, at the root of it is this attitude of identifying oneself with a particular group, calling oneself an Indian, an American, a Christian, a Hindu, and so on. And the mind is then not global, it is local, but our problems are global, and they require a global mind if we want to solve them. Because it is actually that parochial mind which is the cause of all these problems. So are we ever going to solve this without changing the mind? And if it requires a transformation of consciousness, if it requires a new mind, then how does one go about it? How do we come upon a new mind? That seems to me to be the most urgent and perhaps the biggest problem we are facing globally all over the world. The second issue is the result of the very progress that we have made through science and technology. Because we have come upon tremendous power through our knowledge of science and technology. Power is a useful thing. We do use it rightly too. But given the hatred between communities, given the national division, it has also resulted in the production of weapons of war, with the result that we have now a stockpile of nuclear arms, which they say are sufficient to destroy the whole earth 100 times over if they are all used. And we are sitting on top of that stockpile and saying, war should not take place. If I might give a metaphor, it's like putting a lot of mines into the ground everywhere, living on top of it, and making laws saying nobody should light a match anywhere, otherwise it will all explode. That's our state. We have all these stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction in the vaults and laboratories of various countries throughout the world. And we are all making laws saying they should not be used, there should be nuclear disarmament, there should be, United Nations should control this, and so on. But we are not willing to remove the mines under the ground because the mind still is trapped in division and hatred and suspicion and fear.